My name is Victoria, and this story isn't something I share lightly. It's a whirlwind of betrayal, trust, and those moments where your life takes a sharp, unexpected turn. To understand how it all unfolded, you need to know a little about my family and James. James has been a family friend for years, practically part of the furniture in our lives. Charming, witty, and always the center of attention, he had this way of making people feel special, like they were the only ones in the room. He'd been my father's best friend since college, but as I grew older, I started to see cracks in the perfect image he projected. My mom, Evelyn, is the epitome of grace and warmth. She's always been the glue that held our family together, especially when things got rocky. Dad, on the other hand, worked long hours, often away for days on end. It was no secret that their relationship had grown distant over the years, but they still kept up appearances. One evening, as James dropped by for one of his regular visits, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a tension in the air that wasn't there before. He brought his usual charm, laughing with my dad, joking with me, and complimenting my mom a bit more than usual. "You look stunning tonight, Evelyn. That dress really suits you," he said with a smile that lingered just a little too long. Mom laughed it off, brushing it aside as harmless flattery, but I noticed the slight blush on her cheeks. It wasn't like her to react that way. Weeks went by, and James started showing up more frequently, even when Dad wasn't home. It wasn't unusual for him to stop by to chat with Mom while I studied in my room or helped her around the house. But soon, I began hearing snippets of conversations that didn't quite sit right. "I just don't feel like myself anymore, James," I overheard Mom say one afternoon when I came downstairs for a glass of water. "You're incredible, Evelyn. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise," James replied, his voice low and reassuring. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Was this normal? They were family friends, after all. But something about the way they spoke to each other made my stomach churn. Then one evening, the truth began to unravel. My dad had left for another business trip, and I was supposed to be out with friends, but I'd come home early, exhausted from the day. As I walked up to my room, I heard soft voices coming from the living room. Peeking through the doorframe, I saw Mom and James sitting close on the couch. His hand rested lightly on hers, and their heads were tilted toward each other as they spoke in hushed tones. "You deserve more, Evelyn," James whispered. "It's not that simple," Mom replied, her voice tinged with something I hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. I wanted to believe it was all innocent, that maybe they were just talking about something personal, but my instincts screamed otherwise. My mind raced with questions. Was this an affair? Or was it just on the verge of becoming one? Not wanting to jump to conclusions, I decided to confront Mom the next day. I wasn't prepared for what I would find out, or the consequences that would follow. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to confront my mom about what I'd seen. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Confusion, betrayal, fear. I couldn't imagine my mom, the pillar of our family, doing something that might shatter it all. But the image of her and James on that couch haunted me, and I needed answers. As I entered the kitchen, there she was, humming softly while preparing breakfast. She looked so normal, so unbothered, as if everything was perfectly fine. I hesitated, my resolve wavering, but then I reminded myself of the scene from the night before. "Mom, can we talk?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to me, her face immediately filled with concern. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "It's about James." Her expression faltered for just a moment, so quick that if I hadn't been watching closely, I might have missed it. "James? What about him?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I saw you two last night," I said bluntly, watching her reaction. "You were sitting on the couch holding hands and talking. It didn't look like just a friendly conversation." Her face turned pale, and she set down the spatula she was holding. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting to the floor. Then she let out a sigh, as if the weight of the world had suddenly been placed on her shoulders. "It's not what you think, Victoria," she said softly. "Then what is it?" I pressed, because it sure didn't look innocent. She pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit down. I did, my heart pounding in anticipation of whatever she was about to say. "Your father and we've been struggling for a long time," she began, her voice shaky. "It's not something I ever wanted you to notice, but I guess I haven't been hiding it as well as I thought. James, he's been a friend, someone I could talk to when I felt alone." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" I asked, my voice rising. "You're not just talking to him, you're letting him get too close." Her eyes welled up with tears. "I never meant for things to get complicated," she admitted. "James has been supportive in ways your father hasn't been for years, but I swear nothing has happened. I would never do that to your father or to you." I wanted to believe her, but the memory of their closeness made me doubt her words. "Do you have feelings for him?" I asked bluntly. She hesitated, and in that pause, I had my answer. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I care about him, but I know it's wrong. I've been trying to distance myself, but it's complicated." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mom, this isn't just about you. If Dad finds out, if anyone finds out, this could destroy everything. You have to stop this, whatever it is." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You're right. I know you're right. I just..." She stopped, unable to finish her sentence. Before I could say anything else, the doorbell rang. We both froze, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes. It was as if the universe was testing her resolve. "I'll get it," she said quickly, wiping her tears and heading to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, but my curiosity got the better of me and I peeked around the corner. When she opened the door, there he was, James. He smiled, but his expression faltered when he saw her red, tear-streaked face. "Evelyn, is everything okay?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I stayed hidden, watching as my mom tried to compose herself. "Now's not a good time, James," she said firmly. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" he asked, his concern evident. She glanced in my direction as if she knew I was watching. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but resolute. For the first time, I saw James look uncertain, even nervous. "About what?" "About this. Whatever this is," she said, gesturing between them. "It needs to stop. I can't do this anymore." His expression shifted, a mix of disappointment and something else I couldn't quite place. "Evelyn, I never meant to complicate things for you," he said. "I just wanted to be there for you." "And I appreciate that," she replied, her voice steadying. "But this us, it's not right. I need to focus on my family, and I appreciate that," she replied, her voice steadying. "But this us, it's not right. I need to focus on my family." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. I'll give you space." As he turned to leave, our eyes met. His face was a mask of emotions, regret, guilt, and something that almost looked like relief. He gave me a small nod before walking out the door. When Mom returned to the kitchen, she looked exhausted, as if the conversation had drained every ounce of energy from her. "I'm going to fix this," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "I'll make things right." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. For a while, things seemed to settle down. James stopped coming around as often, and my mom seemed to refocus her energy on our family. She was more attentive to my dad, making an effort to bridge the emotional distance that had grown between them. I wanted to believe her when she said she was fixing things. I wanted to believe that the storm had passed. But life has a way of throwing unexpected twists when you least expect them. It was a Saturday morning when the facade began to crack again. I was cleaning up the living room when my dad called out from the office. "Victoria, can you come here for a second?" His tone was light, casual, which put me at ease as I walked over. But as soon as I entered the room, I noticed the tension in his face. He held his phone in one hand, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked, turning the screen toward me. It was a text message, but the name on the sender ID made my stomach drop. James. The message read, "I hope you're doing okay, Evelyn. I'll always be here for you." I tried to mask my reaction, but my father's sharp eyes caught the slight hesitation. "Victoria?" he pressed. I don't know." I stammered, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the secret I had been carrying, pressing down on me like a physical force. Dad's expression darkened as he scrolled through more messages. "These aren't the kind of texts you send to a family friend, are they?" I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pale as a sheet. She must have sensed the brewing storm. "Evelyn?" Dad said, his voice low and steady but with a sharp edge. "What's going on with you and James?" Her eyes darted between us, and for a moment she looked as though she might deny everything. But then, with a shaky breath, she sat down. "Let me explain." "Please do," Dad said, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Mom began to talk, her voice trembling but steady enough to lay it all out. She told him about the emotional distance she had felt, about how James had been a shoulder to lean on during tough times. She insisted that nothing physical had ever happened, but she admitted to an emotional connection that had gone too far. My dad listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "So you're telling me that while I've been working my tail off to provide for this family, you've been confiding in James, my best friend?" "It wasn't like that," Mom said quickly. "It was never meant to go this far. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. Truly I am." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, unsure whether to leave the room or stay. "Victoria," Dad said suddenly, turning to me. "Did you know about this?" I hesitated, the truth hanging heavy on my tongue. "I suspected something," I admitted. "I confronted Mom about it a few weeks ago, and she said she was going to end it." "And yet here we are," he said bitterly, shaking his head. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult I'd ever witnessed. My dad's anger simmered just below the surface, but he managed to keep it from boiling over. He asked hard questions, questions that made my mom cry and made me feel like an intruder in my own home. By the time it was over, Dad stood up and grabbed his keys. "I need some air," he said, his voice hollow. Mom tried to stop him, but he shook his head. "I just need time to think." And with that, he walked out the door. That night, the house was eerily quiet. Mom stayed in her room, and I didn't dare disturb her. I couldn't stop replaying the day's events in my head, wondering if our family would ever recover from this. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home was palpable. Dad spent more time at work, coming home late and leaving early. Mom threw herself into repairing the damage, writing him letters, planning dinners, and apologizing in every way she could. As for James, he disappeared from our lives entirely. I later heard through the grapevine that he had moved to another city, perhaps realizing the depth of the destruction he had caused. Eventually, my parents found a way to start rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. Therapy sessions, long talks, and a renewed effort to prioritize their marriage helped them slowly mend what had been broken. As for me, I learned a lot from the ordeal. I learned that trust is fragile, that people are flawed, and that even the strongest relationships can falter. But I also learned that forgiveness and resilience can pave the way for healing, even in the face of betrayal. Looking back, I'm grateful that my mom stopped things before they went too far. It could have been so much worse. And while our family will never be the same, we've come out of it stronger in some ways. More honest, more aware, and more committed to each other.